What's up, guys, and welcome to the Week 9 NFL Player Pool. Going to dig into the DraftKings Player Pool for Week 9 main slate, and there are a lot of matchups that stand out as really good matchups, and ownership across the field is spread out pretty evenly, so it'll give us some opportunities to take advantage of those matchups, and we'll get into it after this. What's up, guys? Simon Edwards at PumaCom here with Heat Seeker Sports, and you're watching Player Pool. This is the NFL Week 9 Player Pool. Going to dig into the DraftKings Player Pool and figure out which players have the best matchups and which players have the best prices so we can take advantage of that and figure out how we might want to approach building our lineups. Had a lot of success last week and the Cedric Tillman connection, and that paid off for us, and we threw in Njoku in that one too, and he ended up scoring a touchdown as well. But we also had a bunch of ancillary players in that lineup that did really well. So hopefully we can continue that success this week. Been having more success on the main slate than Showdown recently, so let's keep that going with Week 9. Going to ask you guys to like the video. When I get 30 likes, I put out a shorter video later on, closer to lock, with my final thoughts on the slate, final guys that I like. And then also, you're going to want to subscribe to the channel so that you get an alert when those videos come out, because they come out usually around an hour before lock, but there's no set time on them. So make sure to hit subscribe and sign up for the alerts so that you know when these videos come out. And also the Showdown videos, the game script videos, when those come out, usually try to post them earlier in the day of the game. But with the Sunday shows, sometimes I'll put them up on Saturday night. So make sure to sign up for the alerts so you know when those shows come up. So let's dig into this player pool here. Like I said, there's a lot of good matchups on this slate, good games to focus on this slate. Evenly spread ownership, which is always good. I think a large part of that has to do with, this is almost a full slate. I think there's only a couple teams that aren't playing this week. And yeah, San Francisco and Pittsburgh are the only teams not playing this week. But we do have a lot of good games that we can focus on. So let's start breaking this down. I'm going to lead things off with Denver at Baltimore. This is an interesting spot for the Denver side in particular. Baltimore has a rougher matchup on their side, but Denver with Bo Nix, he's been playing really well lately. You can see it in his game log. He had 29 DraftKings points last week, almost 30. He's had a couple weeks where he's plus 20. He's a little more expensive now, though, at 5,900. So not necessarily a good value, a great value for us. He is relatively cheap, under 6K still. But I think there's cheaper ways that we can go. But Bo Nix finds himself in a matchup where Baltimore is giving up a boatload of points to quarterbacks and receiving weapons. They're giving up 21 DraftKings points, 21.7 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback, 26.6 to wideouts, 16.8 to slots, and 14.7 to tight ends. They're basically only good against running backs. They're only giving up 20 DraftKings points a game to running backs. Every other position is in play. And we've seen some pretty bad quarterbacks have big games against Baltimore. We saw Jameis Winston have a monster game against them last week. And, I think that there is definitely upside with Bo Nix, but his price is getting up there. So, not necessarily the highest guy on my list. Jackson has a much more difficult matchup. Denver does play a lot of man defense, which is good for running quarterbacks. But if I was going to play a side on this as far as a fantasy output, I'd probably have Nix over Lamar Jackson based on price and matchup. So Lamar Jackson, you could always have that upside, though. We know that with Lamar Jackson. As far as running backs, not really an interest in running backs in this game. Denver has a bad matchup and Henry has a middling matchup. and Henry is expensive at 8,300. If you wanted to build a Knicks stack, I could see Henry as a run back for sure. But I tend to stay away from this game other than, maybe Bo Nix. And I like receiver in this game in Cortland Sutton. I think Sutton is, he's improving along with Bo Nix, or his upside has been improving along with the Bo Nix, becoming a good quarterback, basically. He had 21 DraftKings points last week against Carolina, an easy matchup. 15 against the Chargers, a more difficult matchup, and 15 versus the Jets as well. But now he faces off against Baltimore, which I said is giving up 26.6 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. So that's going to put Cortland Sutton in a really good spot. And he's at 5,400, which is pretty cheap for a wide receiver one who's going to have the upside of this matchup and the volume in this matchup. Zay Flowers and Bateman would be good options other than the matchup if you wanted a run back. Problem with those guys is they just added Deontay Johnson, and Deontay runs basically the same routes as those guys, or at least the same routes as Zay Flowers. So the shorter intermediate routes. So I'm not really sure what to make of Deontay Johnson on the team. We saw him really start to break out with Carolina when Andy Dalton became the starting quarterback. He's good with veteran quarterbacks. I think he's going to be good on Baltimore. I don't think we see it necessarily this week yet, but it's a good addition for Baltimore, but maybe not so much from a fantasy perspective as it's going to make the wide receiver situation a lot more murky. 6,300 for him, though. I wouldn't anticipate him doing too much this week, but you never know. Zay Flowers, he's going to be hurt the most, I think, from that addition. He'd been having a decent year, a bunch of weeks over 20 DraftKings points, but I think Zay Flowers will take a ding. I don't think he'll take a ding, necessarily this week due to Johnson, but he will take a ding as far as his matchup because Denver's pass defense is really good. So not really interested in anyone other than those couple of guys. If you wanted to take a flyer, maybe as far as tight end, Krull is still under 3K. He got a lot of opportunity taken away from Troutman last week. 2 targets, 2 receptions, 18 yards, only 3 DraftKings points. Before that, he had 2 weeks in a row with 4 targets. But you see, with Troutman last week, he ended up with 4 targets last week, 85 yards and a touchdown. So kind of messy with the tight end situation. But if you wanted a cheap flyer, those guys have a really good tight end matchup too, with Baltimore giving up 14.7 DraftKings points a game to the tight end position. If we go to Dallas versus Atlanta, this one we're looking at a total of 51.5, so it's the highest total on the slate. As far as ownership, let's take a look at some of the ownership on this one. Atlanta, we're talking about 25% ownership on Drake London, which is really high, given Drake London. Let's see. As far as his matchup, Dallas is giving up 20.2 DraftKings points a game to the wideout position. Drake London is still under 7K. He'll get a decent amount of opportunity, but for 7K or 6,700, right underneath 7K, he's only hit over 20 DraftKings points once all season. So he's got a limited upside. The guy that I like much more in this matchup is going to be Bijan. Bijan will come in just shy of 20% ownership, it looks like, but his price is getting up there too at 7,400. But he's still not price prohibitive like the 8K guys. So, Bijan plays like an 8K guy, and he doesn't have the price tag, or at least he hasn't caught up to him yet because he's only had his breakout these past 3 games. So I think that he's got a really good matchup with Dallas giving up 27 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. And I like Bijan a ton this week. And his ownership's not horrible, and his price still is cheap relative to, some of the caliber running backs that he might be in the same league with, like Saquon Barkley and guys like that. CeeDee Lamb is another guy that we could go to this week with the Falcons giving up 20.2 DraftKings points a game to wideouts and 14.1 to slots. So they're weak and vulnerable versus both types of wide receivers or both types of receivers. So CeeDee Lamb plays a lot of his routes, obviously, from the slot. 8,800 though, considering what he's done. He had that one monster week last week where he broke out for 42 points against San Francisco, but really hard to pay $8,800 for CeeDee Lamb, even though the matchup's really good. Darnell Mooney is another option in this one. He's got that same good matchup that Drake London has, but the question is he going to be able to put up enough points to justify his $6K salary? You probably need about 24 DraftKings points to do that, and he's only hit that once all season. So maybe he's a little bit pricey for that cost, but he has the matchup. So I don't hate leaving him in the player pool this week, especially if you want to get off of that Drake London exposure or Drake London ownership. Darnell comes in under 10% this week. So makes a good option there. I don't hate the Falcons defense in this one either, just because of the way the Cowboys have been playing. They're playing at home in Atlanta. Falcons defense, they haven't really had any big weeks, but they're pretty cheap at 2,900. So I don't hate leaving them in there as a potential defense option. All right, let's go to Miami versus Buffalo. Miami has never played well against Buffalo with these coaching regimes, and it's going to get – let's take a look at the ownership on some of these Miami guys. Tyreek was chalk last week. This week he's at about 16% ownership. 7,300 is his salary. Let's see where he was at last week. Last week, Tyreek was 7,300, so he's gotten down in salary. So from a perspective of value, he's gone up 300 in salary. So perspective of value, he's still got that good value to him. But this might not be the best matchup to target him, although given the price tag there, he definitely has the capability of putting up 28 or so DraftKings points in any matchup. But he's been owned by Buffalo in the games that they've played so far since he's joined the Dolphins. So I don't really trust Tyreek in this matchup, but the value on the price tag, he's got the same value he had last week, basically, when we wanted him versus Arizona. It's just a much worse matchup. So Tyreek is a player, though, that all it takes is him to get one catch to basically break the slate, or a couple catches to break the slate. So him at 7,300, manageable ownership. It's not too bad for Tyreek, but just got to be careful of that matchup situation. Other than that, with Miami's defense and Buffalo's defense are both the weakest against the running back positions. Both are pretty strong against passing games. Like Buffalo's only giving up 14.4 DraftKings points a game to quarterbacks, and Miami's only giving up 10.9. And wideouts, they both have bad matchups. 15 for the matchup against Miami, and then Buffalo's giving up 13.9 DraftKings points. Really, there's no great spots here to turn to other than running backs. So, like if you're looking at running backs, you got James Cook. I saw Warren Sharp video the other day. He was hitting the over on James Cook's longest rush of the day. But, the Bills have a really good matchup in this one from a running back perspective. Cook's been scoring touchdowns this year, something that he hasn't done in the past. And, he's He's just shown upside this year that he's never shown in the past. So I don't hate Cook in this matchup. I also don't hate A-Chain. A-Chain is a much better player with Tua on the field. And, he's basically the wide receiver too, even though they got Jalen Waddle. So he's only 6,700. I think that's still pretty cheap for A-Chain, and he's got the best matchup for the Miami side. So I do like A-Chain in this. Obviously has the Mostert issue to deal with, maybe poaching some of those touchdown down opportunities. But I do like A-Chain in this matchup. Other than that, I think that's probably the running backs are probably the only ones I'm really interested in. Not really interested in Josh Allen or Tua this week. I don't know if the game environment's going to lend itself to shooting out. They're playing on Buffalo on top of that. So, Tua, playing outside or playing away from home, playing away basically. Like Tua's very, finicky with his matchups, and he does really well in some perfect matchups. And when the matchup's not perfect or the situation's not perfect, like Tua just crumbles. And I just don't think that this is a matchup where he's going to be having a lot of success this week. Let's go with New Orleans versus Carolina. Carr is back this week, and he finds himself in just about the best matchup he can find himself. And this is where we typically target these veteran quarterbacks in these really good matchups. And from a matchup perspective, New Orleans is giving up 20, or Carolina's giving up 20.1 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. On the other side, Carolina's got a pretty good matchup too. Not necessarily from the quarterback position, but New Orleans is giving up 16.2 DraftKings points a game to slots. They're giving up 25.5 to running backs. So there is opportunity for Carolina to put up, like some points in this one. But the New Orleans side, they're the ones that have the better matchup. Derek Carr in that matchup against Carolina, where they're giving up 20 DraftKings points a game to quarterbacks. Carolina's giving up 31 DraftKings points a game to running backs. They're giving up 23.8 to wide receivers, wideouts. The only thing that they've been decent against is slots. They've only been giving up 10 DraftKings points to slots, and they've been giving up 16 DraftKings points to tight ends. So there's all sorts of good spots in this game for the New Orleans side, especially. Carr is in a good spot. If we go to running back, Kamara is in a good spot. Kamara, he's been a little bit sluggish lately. Problem with Kamara, 7,800 is his price tag. And then on top of that, he's going to have the ownership. If I'm looking at the ownership on Kamara, let's see, 25% ownership, probably the highest owned guy on the slate because of this matchup. Chuba Hubbard, has that good matchup on the other side. Hubbard's been pretty reliable. Brooks will not be returning this week yet. So, we see him when he's had those cushy matchups, 30 DraftKings points against Vegas, 25 for Cincy, 18.5 against Chicago, who's been weaker against the run. Atlanta, middling. Didn't have he had 15 DraftKings points against them. Not so great against Washington, but they were out of it as far as a game script perspective. It was 40-7 they were losing by, so it completely took out the run. And then against Denver, Denver's just a great defense. But Chuba Hubbard in a better matchup this week against New Orleans, and I don't mind him. The only problem is, I think with the Carolina side in general, is it looks like we got Bryce Young starting in this one. Bryce Young's 4,400 though. If you wanted to start Bryce Young this week, I don't hate it, but I don't like it as much as some of these other opportunities that are out there. Even if the matchup's good, Bryce Young is just a terrible player. But I don't hate it for the value at 4,400. Value is also with these receiving options for Carolina. We got Leggett in a good spot with, let's see, what are they giving up? New Orleans giving up. Well, they're giving up 18 DraftKings points a game to wideout, so it's not a great spot for Leggett, who is running 44% of his routes on the. Let's see, only 32% of his routes are in the slot, which is where New Orleans is more vulnerable at 16.2 DraftKings points a game. Jalen Coker is the guy that we want to target in this matchup if we're looking at matchups, purely at matchups, because that is where the Saints have been vulnerable, giving up 16.2 DraftKings points a game. And Coker, we saw him last week, had a decent game, 6 targets, 4 receptions, and a touchdown, 17 DraftKings points. He's only at 3,600, so he's going to be a popular salary relief guy this week. But, if you land on him, I definitely don't hate using Coker. Tipton, I think I saw like Tipton might be hurt. Maybe not, but he really hasn't been doing too much lately. He had 9 targets against Denver. Hasn't really done too much, though, in general. If I'm looking at Tipton, Bub Means is out, and I think that'll get him more opportunity. Adam Thielen isn't returning this week either, so that helps out Coker. Let's see, Olave, he's obviously going to be in a good matchup. Let's see what the ownership is on Olave. He's 6,100, so he's still cheap. But he gets Derek Carr back this week. He's going to be a little bit under 20% owned. So, it's going to be a high-owned play. I think the guys that I like more on the New Orleans side, considering how expensive Kamara is and how much ownership him and Olave have, I might lean more towards Taysom Hill. I think Taysom Hill, if you want to get different on your Kamara matchups or your Kamara lineups, I don't hate starting Hill with Kamara because Hill might be used more in the passing game since they're missing, like their number 2 wide receiver. So Rashid Shaheed is out. He's on IR. I think he's done for the season. Let me double. Yeah, maybe not done for the season, but let's see. Shaheed is. Oh yeah, he's done for the season. Yeah, so Shaheed's out for the season. So that's gonna elevate some of these other receivers with Bub Means out. So we're missing Means and we're missing Rashid this week. Tipton hasn't really done too much. They picked up Valdez-Scantling. It looks like they're going to be leaning more on some of their reliable weapons or their veteran weapons. I wouldn't be surprised to see Taysom have a decent amount of passing game work this week. 4 targets last week. The defense is really bad against tight ends. They're giving up 16.1 DraftKings points a game to tight ends. But we know with Taysom Hill, we got that running upside too. So, Taysom, I think, is going to be a guy that the team might lean to in general. He's only at 3,800, and on top of that, Carr's coming back from an injury. So, Taysom, we know, has the quarterback upside, the ability to, like step in, maybe if they're, they want to swap out Derek Carr a few times in this game. We've seen it happen a bunch of times. Like, wouldn't be surprised to see, Taysom get some quarterback opportunities, running back opportunities, tight end opportunities. 3,800 against his terrible defense. I also like Juwan Johnson this week. I think Juwan Johnson is going to get more opportunity. He's been stepping up recently as far as targets. He got 6 targets and 4 targets. He's got that same really bad matchup, and I think without Shaheed in the lineup and Bub Means being hurt as well, it's just going to give more opportunity to Taysom and Juwan Johnson. So I like both those guys. Maybe not necessarily together, but I don't hate it together because of the rushing upside of Taysom. So you don't know. you never know if these guys are going to like have a decent week together. Let me take a look at some of last year's breakdowns on these guys. See if they ever had games together. So Taysom and Juwan Johnson. Trying to see, scan through my game logs and see if I see any weeks where Taysom Hill and Juwan Johnson had big weeks at the same week. Let's see. Not seeing anything. But, Taysom Hill has an ability to put up, 20 points, 20 plus points. Last week in week 8, he put up 22 DraftKings points with Derek Carr starting. In week 9, he put up 20 DraftKings points with Derek Carr starting. That one, week 9 last year against the Chicago Bears, Taysom Hill had 20.6 DraftKings points, and Juwan Johnson had 13.9 DraftKings points. Kamara in that game did not have a big game. So there is a precedent there for Taysom and Juwan having a game together where they scored, like a decent amount of points. It's thin, but it has happened. So, I don't hate necessarily putting them together in a situation like this where, maybe you want to use Taysom in the flex and take that $3,800 salary and, maybe put him in instead of Coker or something like that to take, pivot off of that Coker ownership, or put him in with Coker and then just load up the rest of your lineups with studs. That way you get like a run back with Coker. I wouldn't necessarily like stack the quarterbacks in this one. I like Carr better than I like Young though. And Carr's at 5,600, so he's not expensive and he's got a good matchup. So I do like Carr this week. And, Carr, Johnson, and Taysom and Coker, those are probably my favorite players in this game. And the total on this game, again, let's get an idea of what the total on this game is. Only 43.5, but the guys are cheap. So they're cheap and they have, they've shown that they can outperform their price tag. So, don't hate putting guys from this matchup in the lineups this week. Vegas versus Cincinnati. This is a interesting game for me. If you look at Gardner Minshew, he's at 4,500. Gardner Minshew got benched a few weeks ago. And, he's a guy that plays with, plays with a lot. He's pretty aggressive. And, he just hasn't had the weapons on the Raiders, but he gets a matchup this week where he's facing Cincinnati's defense, which had been horrible this year. They're giving up 20.8 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position and 20.3 to wideouts, 14.3 to tight ends. So it's one of those situations where we get that veteran quarterback coming in against a weak defense, and the other team can score a bunch of points. Like Cincinnati could easily put up a bunch of points in this one. So I don't hate Minshew in this at 4,500. The wide receiver pool has been whittled down significantly with Jacoby Myers as really the only option in this past game. He had 7 targets, 9 targets, 10 targets, 9 targets the past 4 weeks, or the past 4 games he's played. And on top of Jacoby Myers, he's got that good matchup. Vegas also has a good matchup for Brock Bowers, with Cincinnati giving up 14 DraftKings points a game to tight ends. This is one where I could see, like a double stack with Minshew, Bowers, and Myers. Myers is at 5,300. Bowers is at 6K. So Bowers is still like relatively, cheap at 6K, if he was a wide receiver putting up the output that he's put up so far this season, I mean, that's sure he'd be like closer to 7K. He had 19 DraftKings points against the Rams, 16 against Pittsburgh, 23 versus Denver, 18 versus Baltimore. So he's been, one of the higher scoring, if not the highest scoring tight end in on the year so far. So Bowers has that upside. Gesicki is another guy that has upside. He's been doing really well. Some people have been putting out the stats of how Gesicki plays without T. Higgins in the lineup. So, I don't hate Gesicki this week either. There's a lot of good tight end options this week. Last week we saw him get 8 targets versus Philly, only converted into 13 DraftKings points, but all it takes is, like one touchdown for that to make it a monster day, especially for a $3,100 price point. So I don't hate Gesicki this week. Other than that, defenses, I mean, Bengals are too expensive for the way that they've played. Raiders defense, I don't hate taking a flyer on the Raiders defense. They haven't played Bengals haven't played as well without T. Higgins. Chase Brown is going to be in a good situation. We got Zach Moss doubtful, and Chase Brown gets this really cushy matchup against Vegas, who's given up 25 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. So the run backs I see are Chase Brown and Mike Gesicki primarily. Obviously, Jamar Chase, he's 8,600. He's expensive. He's going to be price prohibitive, but he obviously has the upside to put up, 44 DraftKings points, but maybe not so much in this matchup. Vegas is only giving up 14.3 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, and Chase hasn't been as good without Higgins in the lineup this year. So, I might lean more towards Chase Brown and Gesicki this week. Get an idea of their ownership. Chase Brown's going to be owned. He's going to be 30%, and Gesicki's going to be 19%. So, I mean, if you want the ownership pivot, Chase makes sense in that situation. Maybe you could go Burrow Chase, but it's a very pricey stack, unfortunately. But maybe Chase, if you put enough of these cheap guys in your lineup, and you can get Chase in there as a decent pivot off of the ownership of those other guys. All right, so we got the Chargers versus the Browns. This one is going to have a total of 42.5 points. The spread's only 1.5 points. Winston, we saw him do really well last week, but he's in a much tougher matchup. I like Winston when he's got the easy matchups like last week against that same Cincy team that against Baltimore, who has that really good pass game matchup. But this week, I'm not really interested in much in this game. The only guy I'd take a flyer on might be Ladd McConkey, who's only at 5,600 still. We saw he's able to put up a 30-point game last week. But McConkey, they've been passing a lot more. You've seen him get 8. You've seen him get higher than 6 targets ever since week 3. So all but one game, he's had 6 or more targets. So, he's got the opportunity. He's got the price tag at 5,600, and he's got the upside like we saw last week when he had his breakout game. As far as the matchup's not great. Cleveland's been giving up only 10.7 DraftKings points a game to slot receivers, but where are they playing to? They're playing at Cleveland, so that's another strike against them. But maybe we see Ladd McConkey have a decent game. 5,600 is worth keeping in our player pool still. Everyone else, I don't have a lot of interest in this game. I think this game's one that we can mostly fade. If we're looking at the defenses, both cheap. relatively cheap. Browns at 2,900, I don't hate, and I don't hate the Chargers at 3,300. All right, so let's go to Washington versus New York. Washington's defense has gotten a lot better, and people are still starting Daniels or Daniel Jones. Let's look at Daniel Jones' ownership. Let's see. Yeah, Daniel Jones isn't coming in as high owned as I thought. He's only at 6.2%, but not a great matchup recently. Facing off against Washington, they've definitely gotten better. Their defense, like Dan Quinn, is their head coach, and he, was the head of the defensive coordinator for Dallas for years, and he's a really good runs a really good defense, and we're seeing it like start to come alive for Washington on their defense, only allowing 15.1 DraftKings points a game to quarterbacks and 9 to tight ends. They're giving up 22.4 to running backs and 19.5 to wideouts. The only place that they've really been weak has been against slot receivers, where they're giving up 13.8 DraftKings points. As far as Neighbors, he's only running 24% of his routes in the slot, but I think they move him around enough so that they try to find him the best matchups. So, Neighbors might have some upside in this one. Last time they faced off, he had 31 DraftKings points, so there you go. Last couple weeks, he's been sluggish, but he's coming off a concussion. So maybe this week we start to see him pick things up a little bit. He also had that Pittsburgh matchup last week, which was a tough matchup. But I think that, 7,500, he still hasn't gotten into that 8K range, even though he's got like something like his target share is ridiculous. Let me get an idea of this matchup specifically. Try to get an idea of what his against the type of defense that they're running here. All right, so Neighbors. Washington's using a lot of man coverage, and he's got a 46.5 point, 46.5% target share against man coverage. So, Neighbors, according to Rich Rebar, he was also targeted 87.5% of his routes when these teams played in week 2 against man coverage. So, yeah, if Washington's using a lot of man coverage, you can expect Neighbors to get a lot of targets. He had that big game against them earlier in the season. Just to get an idea of his ownership. Not a huge ownership. It's only 13% owned. So decent ownership, decent all around for Malik Neighbors this week. He could be one of those sneakier guys or guys that we can leave in our player pool as a pivot off some of those pricier guys. But 7,500 for Malik Neighbors. Other than that, wideouts against the Giants been getting 20.8 DraftKings points a game. So McLaurin is interesting there. McLaurin's price, though, is 7,100. I liked him a lot better when he was in the 5 to 6K range. So, not so thrilled about that ownership on him. We're talking about a 44.5 point total in this one. I think Neighbors would be the main guy I'm interested in. Washington's been giving up 22.4 DraftKings points a game to running backs. Tracy is still cheap at 5,500. So Tracy is the guy that we can leave in our player pool this week. He's getting the work now. He's basically won it from Singletary. So 5,500 for Tracy. I like Brian Robinson this week as well. against the Giants. Giants have been, let's see what they've been giving up to running backs recently. All right, so the Giants these last few weeks against running backs, I don't have my week 8 on me, but they gave up 29.7 to Barkley. They gave up 14.4 to Chase Brown, 14.6 to Walker, 13 to Rico Dowdle. So they've been pretty decent against the run. Robinson had 17.6 in the last game that they played each other. Aaron Jones had 18.9. So, maybe not so much upside in Robinson. I had him on a prop though for underdog this week. Let me get that to you guys so I can show you. So I can show you guys what the this week's underdog plays are. I'm going to switch gears here. Make sure to hit that like button. Give me the 30 likes so I can put out a shorter video later on. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can get alerts for when these videos come out. And plus, I'm trying to get to 1,200 subscribers by Thanksgiving, and I am at about 100 shy of that. So I appreciate help with getting over that hump. I'm going to share over to Underdog. I got, what did I get on this? I got, let me see what kind of upside there is for this week's picks. All right, so I'm looking at 21.2 times my money. So with these 5 picks that I picked this week, make sure to sign up for an Underdog account using the promo code SEEK, SEEK. They're going to match you $1,000. They're going to match you up to 50%, or they're going to match you 50% for up to $1,000 on your first deposit. So make sure to get that free money. We got playoff best ball just around the corner. That is the, by far my favorite game beyond Showdown and everything like that. Had a lot of success with playoff best ball, but you're going to want to load up your accounts to be ready when that comes around. Nick Chubb, I went higher than 12.5 rushing attempts. Chubb came back. He's been back for a couple weeks now, and then he finds himself against the Chargers. I think that 12.5 rushing attempts, I think Nick Chubb can go higher than that this week. Tyreek Hill, I have him lower than 76.5 receiving yards. That's just because of the history against Buffalo. If I'm looking at Tyreek's history against Buffalo, he really has not done well, especially since he's been on Miami and been playing, especially in the McDaniel offense. Let's see. Let's switch over here for a second. We'll look at his history versus Buffalo. So I went under 76 receiving yards. So when he was with the Chiefs, he had 150 yards, 172 yards. But since he's been with Miami, 69 yards in that playoff game, 24 yards. He had that 182-yard game, 58 yards, 69 yards, 32 yards, 63 yards, 20 yards, 41 yards. So he's really, in the regular season, he's only crossed that mark once. And that was especially with Miami, but throughout his career, they've just been able to keep him at bay. But he's only crossed that 76-yard marker once, and that was when he had 82 yards. So even then, he didn't have a really decent game. So I got James Cook higher than 14.5, 14.5 yards for his longest rush. Now, I got that from Warren Sharp. Shout out to Warren Sharp on that one. Warren Sharp liked him over 14.5 for his longest rush. So I just kind of took that into Underdog, and they had it available. So I added that onto this list this week. So we got Chubb above, higher than 12.5 rushing attempts. We got Tyreek lower than 76.5 receiving yards. We got Cook higher than 14.5 on his longest rush. I had Juwan Johnson in there. I put higher than 25.5 receiving yards just based on the matchup with Carolina and the lack of receiving weapons that New Orleans currently has. I think Juwan Johnson's going to be playing a bigger role. If we switch over to DraftKings again, let's take a look at Juwan Johnson so far this season. Juwan Johnson, so far this season, he's had 48 yards, 18 yards, and 48 yards, and 31 yards in his last 4 games. So 3 out of his last 4 games, he's crossed that number, and now he's without Rashid Shaheed competing for targets. So I really like that number for Juwan Johnson this week. And then the final one I had in this was Brian Robinson higher than 57.5 rushing yards. I just think against this New York run D, he can pull that off, and I think that Washington might be playing with a decent enough lead in this one and leaning on the run enough in this one that Brian Robinson can hit that number. Let's look at what Brian Robinson's done with his rushing yards so far this season. All right, so if we're looking at his rushing yards, 65 yards, 71 yards, 101 yards, 133 yards. So he's done it a decent amount of time. Last time he played the Giants, he had 133 rushing yards. So it gives you an idea of some of the thinking on going over that or going higher than that 57.5 rushing yards on Underdog there. So that's 5 picks on Underdog. That'll help you get 22 times your money. So make sure to use the promo code SEEK when you sign up for an Underdog account. I'll be putting out this in a shorter video later on as well, but you get the idea here on a direction that you can go to make 22 times your money. All right, so let's get back into this breakdown. Singletary, not playing as much of a role, so I like Tracy there. Gone over all those guys. As far as the tight ends, Ertz has been decent recently. 14 DraftKings points the past 2 weeks, 11 DraftKings point the week before that. He's cheap at 4,300 still. This Giants defense, let's take a look at the matchup. Giants defense, it's been a tougher defense, so maybe not so high on Ertz this week. All right, let's go to New England versus Tennessee. I kind of like this game. Tennessee's defense has been really bad. I shouldn't say I like this game. I like the matchup for Drake May a little bit in this one. Drake May, what's his price tag at? 5,500. So he's getting up there a bit, but I kind of like Drake May this week. He's had those 2 weeks over 20 DraftKings points. He was having a decent game against the Jets, and then he got taken out with a concussion. He had 11 DraftKings points before he went out. He'd already scored a touchdown in that one. I think Drake May could put up 20 DraftKings points for us against Tennessee. Don't know if that's going to be enough for us this week, especially with Minshew as an option. I think Minshew at 4,500, I think he could put up 20 DraftKings points against Cincy. So Drake May, he's another cheap guy that we can keep in our player pool this week, though. He's shown he's had the rushing upside as well. As far as the Tennessee side, Pollard has the best matchup with New England giving up 27.1 DraftKings points a game to running back position. They're also giving up 13.5 to slot receivers. Ridley should get a bunch of targets in this one at 5,700. Like last week, he got 15 targets, 9 targets a week before that, 8 targets a week before that. I think we should see Rudolph again. I don't know what Levis's status is. Yeah, I'm not sure what the status of Levis is going to be, something to keep an eye out for. But if we get Rudolph, I think that's going to give more upside to Ridley. And New England's pass defense has been terrible lately, giving up 19.7 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. So I don't hate Ridley this week as a run back if you want to use a Drake May style. And even with New England, with Drake May, I might even just go skinny stack Drake May and run it back with Ridley. I don't think you need to stack any of these weapons with Drake May. I think he's got the upside on his own. If I was going to stack him with anybody, Booty's been getting a decent amount of targets lately. He got 6 targets against the Jets. Douglas would be the logical guy with how they've been doing against slot receivers, but he's only gotten 3 targets in each of the last 2 weeks. I don't know what's going on with Douglas, but he's shown like he's had those stretch of 9 target games too. And his price is only $4,400. So if I was going to stack him with anybody, I'd probably go back to Douglas and just hope that Douglas does something. And then I'd run it back with Ridley probably or Pollard. Pollard's going to have the ownership. Pollard's questionable though, with a foot. And he didn't practice all week. So keep an eye on that Pollard situation. And Tajay's been ruled out. So if those guys are both out, that's going to give us Chestnut here at 4K in that really good matchup. So Chestnut might be one of the highest owned guys on the slate. Let's hope this news comes out like right before lock. If this news comes out that Pollard is out right before lock, then Julius Chestnut is in a really good spot at 4K against this New England defense that's given up 27 DraftKings points a game to running back position. So keep Julius Chestnut in mind. Keep him in your player pool. Other than that, I think we can move on to the next game here. Chicago, Arizona. Chicago's been playing better recently, but they've been playing better against weak defenses. And they get another weak defense with Arizona this week, giving up 18.4 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position, 25 to running backs, 19.4 to wideouts, and 14.7 to slots. So all around good matchup for Chicago this week. The thing we need is for Arizona to put up points, but Chicago's got a good defense, only giving up 12 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. They've been more vulnerable versus running backs, where they're giving up 20.8 DraftKings points. So if you're doing a stack, it might make sense to put Connor in there as your run back. Connor's had a pretty decent season on top of that. But if we're looking at Caleb Williams, he's 6,100, so he's getting pricey. You know, you hate to see that because he was under 6K for the entire season up until this week. Now he finally crosses that 6K. He was 6K last week, but he's at 6,100 now this week. So getting a little bit pricey. If I was stacking him with anyone, it'd probably be Keenan Allen, just with how that's where they're the most vulnerable. They're the most vulnerable to slot receivers, Arizona is. Keenan Allen, 21 DraftKings points against Jacksonville. Other than that, he hasn't really done anything, but he's only 5,500, and he seems to be a guy that's getting targeted a decent amount, 7 targets, 5 targets, 6 targets. DJ Moore, he's been taking a dip in targets since Allen got back. DJ Moore, though, he's always going to be in play, but he's got a decent matchup too with that 19.4 DraftKings points a game. If you're going to stack 2 receivers with Caleb this week, probably would make one of them Keenan Allen and then just kind of rotate between DJ Moore. I don't think Odunze gets enough volume for him to help us much. Let me check and see what he got 6 targets last week. Let's check and see what his snap share is. Going to switch over to Fantasy Pros. sort this by team. Let's go to Chicago here. All right, snap shares. DJ Moore had 95% last week. Odunze had 75, so he had a decent snap share. And Keenan Allen had 97. So, yeah, I mean, I guess, like, if I was going to start a double stack here, I'd want a double stack, I think, with Caleb Williams in general. But, Allen would probably be like the safest guy, and then maybe pair him with Odunze or Moore, or even Cole Kmet. Or you could even pair them with DeAndre Swift, who has a good matchup in this one too. Swift has been used in the targeted in the passing game as well. 4 targets, 7 targets, 4 targets, 5 targets. So he's not all rushing for Swift, but he has put up a decent amount of rushing yards recently. He's kind of broken out ever since everyone was making fun of him. So Swift isn't too terrible either at 6,400 as a stacking partner. Or if you want to just fade the passing game altogether and go with like DeAndre Swift, I think that makes a lot of sense too. I don't know too much that I'd run back on the Arizona side. I don't really like anyone too much on the Arizona side, but you can look at Marvin Harrison. He's got that 19.4 DraftKings points a game, which they're giving up. Now, there is one thing with that they changed this week that helped Harrison break out a little bit is Kyler Murray actually asked him what kind of routes he likes to run. So, at least Kyler Murray is putting in an effort to get Harrison like the types of routes that he wants. Before, he was just doing go routes every week, and that was a well-known, well-discussed thing. And, it's just a stale, boring offense. And Kyler Murray, I don't know if they gave him the thumbs up or whatever, but he went to Harrison, asked him what kind of targets or what kind of routes he likes to run. And then they started implementing some of that last week. So, I mean, I don't know why it took him to 8 weeks to ask him what kind of routes he likes to run, but at least they're making an effort to get Harrison more involved. 6,900 though, that's the cheapest we've seen him. For the most part, we've seen him 6,800. So this might be the cheapest that we see Harrison if he's got it figured out now at 6,900. So I don't hate using Harrison in this matchup either. If we're moving to Jacksonville, Philly, Barkley is again going to have the best matchup. Problem is he keeps killing us with these tush pushes. Last week they were on the 1-yard line almost throughout the game, and freaking Hurts just kept getting those tush pushes, and it was just destroying the upside of Barkley. He should have had at least 2 touchdowns last week, so that took out 12 DraftKings points off him, would have given us 27 DraftKings points on. It's tough to go back to Barkley when they keep getting stalled out on the 1-yard line. We see Jalen Hurts taking all the fantasy points, but he's in another good matchup. Jacksonville versus Philly. Jacksonville's given up 27 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. Enough people are frustrated with Barkley losing those touchdowns at this point that his ownership is sub 10%, which, all it takes is for him to complete those damn runs and not get tackled at the 1-yard line for something to happen here. And that could happen for sure against Jacksonville. So 8,200, I'll probably be using Barkley again this week. So, I'm going to be keeping him in my player pool for sure. As far as other matchups here, Philly's just got good matchups across the board against Jacksonville. You can basically, choose who you want. For Philly, just make sure it's a regularly used guy. I think the amount of man coverage that Jacksonville uses, it's going to be a better matchup for A.J. Brown on the wide receiver sides. But, I wouldn't rule out Smith, but I think Brown is where the matchup lies. And as far as ownership goes, we're really not looking at a lot of ownership in this one. This might be a game to stack, actually. A.J. Brown, less than 7% ownership in a matchup where he's going to be facing a lot of man coverage. These are the type of matchups that he breaks out in. The only problem is I don't know if we're going to have enough firepower on the other side. We've seen, obviously, Green Bay was a man coverage matchup, 25.9 DraftKings points against them. I think the Giants run a decent amount of man. He had 19 against them. Cleveland. Let's see how much Cleveland runs. The Browns run fourth highest amount of man coverage, so he had a big week against them too, at 26 DraftKings points. So, he finds himself in another one of these great matchups. Problem is, on the other side, Thomas Jr. is questionable. There's talk of him missing multiple weeks, and now it's like day to day. So he's going to be a game time decision. If he plays, that's going to help our cause if you want to stack Philly. Kirk is out for the season. Gabe Davis, questionable as well. I wonder how questionable he's going to be. Problem too with the Philly side is their defense has been coming alive. I talked about this in the beginning of the year with how Vic Fangio usually takes multiple weeks before his defense is going to start gelling, and we've seen that since the bye. They've been coming alive, and they've only been allowing 14.7 DraftKings points a game to quarterbacks, 19 DraftKings points a game to running backs, 17.3 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, 7.3 to tight ends. Those are all bottom 10. And then 15 DraftKings points a game to slot is the only place that they've been vulnerable. And we've been targeting slot receivers against Philly all year. Problem is Christian Kirk is out. So maybe that opens the door for Evan Ingram to have a decent game against these Eagles. If he's getting those slot routes, we've seen it with Evan Ingram. He can put up 22 DraftKings points. I don't hate Ingram. We got a lot of tight ends. This might be a two tight end week, actually, with how many good tight end matchups there are. But yeah, it's just tons of opportunity there for Ingram if he's going to be running out of the slot and face that weekend matchup. And then on the other side, we got Brown, and we're hoping that Barkley gets to complete some of these touchdowns and stop getting them poached by Hurts. Hurts last week, I swear they were doing the tush push every time I turned on that game. It was driving me nuts. He ended up with three rushing touchdowns last week, to give you an idea. So they did it 3 times. That's 3 touchdowns that were poached from Saquon Barkley, and it gave him Hurts 35 DraftKings points. And, that's the type of game we could have been looking at last week with Barkley, which would have helped big time with those Jameis Winston to Cedric Tillman lineups, and, just killed us last week. So I don't mind going back with Barkley and hoping that swings in our direction this week. Detroit versus Green Bay. This is a matchup we're hoping that Love plays. Although Detroit's been a tough defense this year, they are still vulnerable to wideouts and slot receivers, even no matter how good Detroit's defense is on paper. They've been giving up 20.2 DraftKings points a game to wideouts and 22.9 to the slot. That 22.9 number is the most in the league to slot receivers, and that is where Jaden Reed obviously runs the most of his routes. Problem is, do we get Jordan Love in this game to throw him the ball? That's going to be a big concern. Let's see if they played against Detroit. They haven't played against Detroit yet this season, but let's go to last season here. All right, let's go to last season and look at his games against Detroit. Give us an idea of how he's done against Detroit in the past. So he had 8 targets for 34 yards and a touchdown, and 5 targets for 55 yards. So nothing huge, but I mean, that was his rookie year. Now we get him facing off against Detroit, which is a sieve against these slot receivers. So I don't hate Reed this week. The type of defense that Detroit has been running, pretty heavy on the man side. That's going to favor Dobbs. Just confirm that. Yeah, Detroit is number one man coverage rate in the league. And Dobbs has been the guy. We went with him last week too. Similar situation. And he got 6 targets, only 10 DraftKings points against Jacksonville in that matchup, but he did get 6 targets, so he had the opportunity. 72 yards, just didn't score a touchdown for us. Gets that same opportunity this week. So I don't hate using Dobbs this week either. Question on these guys is always going to be, is Jordan Love playing this week? The total on the game, when I checked, was 47.5. So I have a feeling that they think that Love is going to play. I don't know how that's going to move the line when it's official or if it becomes official. Jared Goff also, not so interesting against Detroit because, Green Bay's only giving up 15.4 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. The tight end position has been the weakest. So if I was doing a run back with a Jordan Love stack, if I wanted to stack Love with Reed and Dobbs, let's see what the prices are on those guys. 6,400 and 57. They're both pretty pricey. The guy to run it back with is going to be Laporta. Laporta's at 4,800. He's getting cheaper. 16.8 DraftKings points last week against Tennessee. He had 6 targets in that game. I wouldn't be surprised to see Laporta have a bit of a breakout game against Green Bay this week. Let's go to Laporta and see how he's done against Green Bay. So we know that he's played him at least twice. All right, so he had 8 targets for 47 yards and a touchdown, 5 targets for 56 yards and no touchdown. So nothing spectacular there, but it is an exploitable matchup this week. So Laporta at 4,800 is another tight end that we could use potentially this week. If it's Malik this week, maybe Lions D wouldn't be such a bad play. From the running backs, Gibbs and Montgomery, it's basically maybe Gibbs if the game is going to be closer, maybe Montgomery if we're anticipating Malik Willis playing. But, both of these guys have been consistent. Gibbs has been scoring a lot more DraftKings points. So maybe Gibbs would be the lean if you were picking between the two. 7,600 versus 65 for Montgomery. If you wanted the discount, like Montgomery is certainly a guy, that can score touchdowns, especially in this matchup. So either of those guys is usable this week. Rams versus Seattle. This is a game with a 48.5 point total. So monster total there compared to the slate. Let's get an idea of the ownership on this one. The Rams. All right, everybody's sub 9% in this one on the Rams. Let's look at the Seattle side. And on the Seattle side, we got everybody sub 12%. So we got a high total game. This one is going to stick out like a sore thumb, at least on my spreadsheet. Without the ownership on this game, like this game might be the game to target this week. Stafford, obviously, 5,700. He's cheap. When he doesn't have Puka and Kupp, you see what he does, and that's why his price is so cheap. When he got him back last week, 25 DraftKings points. When he had them both for a portion of the game versus Detroit, 18.68 DraftKings points. Stafford gets elevated massively when he's got these two receivers playing, and they're both looking good to play. Puka is the guy that he was going to heavily last week. Seattle. Now, keep in mind, Seattle has been missing a lot of their defense recently, which is why some of these matchups might look good. But they're giving up 16.9 to quarterbacks, 25.9 to running backs, 19.4 to wideouts, 11.1 to slots, and 14 to tight ends. Let's take a look at the injuries. All right, so the Rams, Noteboom is, we're looking at the Seattle injuries. Metcalf is out. Looks like he's officially been ruled out. Fant is out. Right tackle Abraham Lucas is out. Defensive tackle Cameron Young is out. So that's interesting. Let me check on Witherspoon. Witherspoon being out is why we were targeting a lot of these guys against Seattle recently. Devin Witherspoon. Just reading up on Witherspoon here. Biggest addition to this week's injury report is that of cornerback Devin Witherspoon, who is also a non-participant. He's listed with a foot injury. Yeah, keep an eye on Witherspoon's. Let's see. I'm trying to get a better idea. Injury report for this week for Seattle. If Witherspoon's out, then that's going to be huge for like Stafford stacks. All right, Metcalf is out. All right, Witherspoon had full practices on Thursday and Friday, so he's not going to miss, it looks like. Reek Woolen, full practice all week. So they're healthier. But, Puka Nacua definitely in play against Seattle, who's been struggling. And he got a boatload of targets in his first game back. I was thinking he was going to be eased back in, but I was completely wrong on that one. He ended up with 9 targets, and that pushed Cooper Kupp out of the picture. He ended up getting 8 targets still, ended up with 16 DraftKings points. The price tags on these guys, they're over $7K. So they're being priced like they were priced before their injuries. So it'd probably be a situation where you don't really want to stack both of them with Stafford. You probably have to stack one of them. As far as the Rams defense, they've been vulnerable mostly to wideouts, where they're giving up 22 DraftKings points a game, giving up 14.7 to slots, but we saw that with Fant being out. They're giving up 23 DraftKings points a game to running backs. So they're playing in Seattle. The play here might be Kenneth Walker. All these pieces are expensive too, so I can see why their ownership's low. It's kind of like that situation last week with Cincinnati. I'm going to start building because I know I like that game. I just don't know how to play it yet. So let's put Stafford in there. Let's put Nacua in there. And let's run it back with Walker. Let's get Bijan in there too. I like his matchup, at least for now. If we get the defense in there, Jags versus Philly, Giants versus Washington, Panthers versus New Orleans. I don't hate the Panthers against New Orleans. Miami, Buffalo, Seattle, Rams. Arizona, Chicago, Green Bay, Detroit, Denver, Baltimore. Chicago versus Arizona might be the best one I see so far at 2,800. Atlanta, Dallas, I don't hate either. Let's go with Chicago. Chicago's had a good, consistent defense this year. For tight end, I'm going to go with that Taysom Hill situation. Going to exploit that a little bit here. Let's go Taysom Hill, and let's get that. We got 5,200 per guy. Taysom, let's run it back with Coker. Just get our cheap guys in there. That puts us in a better spot with 6,100. So we might be able to do the. Let's do a double tight end here. Seen a bunch of guys that I like this week. But if we wanted to, go cheap with maybe Gesicki, that leaves us with 9,100. You have your option of like Lamb, Brown, like both those guys this week. You could double stack Kupp in there with Stafford, which I don't hate either. If we did that, if we put Kupp in as a double stack, let's get Gesicki out of there because it leaves us with 4,500. I think in that situation, I mean Chestnut would be like an easy plug-in at 4K, but you also got guys like Tillman, who's in another good, like potentially good matchup. Maybe not the best matchup. But you can scroll down and just basically look at all the guys like that I named that are pretty cheap. Once you get past these running backs, there's going to be options there. But it gives you an idea of a Stafford direction you could go if you wanted to use a Ram stack in there. Let's clear that out. Who else is good? Oh, Minshew. Let's go with Minshew this time. So if we went with Minshew, let's stack him with Myers and Bowers. And let's run it back with Brown. At least it's at 5,600, so that's not too bad. Let's go to defense. Let's get the same defense I had in there. Bears. And let's go with wide receivers. I like AJ Brown a lot. Let's go with Nakua again. Actually, let's hold off on Nakua there. There's a lot of good matchups this week for receivers. And I think people are going to go pretty cheap and skip these guys like AJ Brown, who has a good matchup. Let's say we went Barkley. Let's get Coker in there. That leaves us with 5,600. Now we got Barkley and Brown in there. If we wanted to swap him, let's swap him. Let's flip Barkley out for Robinson again, Bijan. That's going to leave us with 6,400 in the flex. really easy to build lineups this week, guys. DeAndre Swift, boom, like Jordan Reed if Jordan Love is playing, or Jalen Reed if Jordan Love is playing. Olave, another good matchup. A lot of options here. So definitely a lot of good ways we can go. McConkey, another option. Lockett probably gets the biggest bump if Metcalf is out. And then you got like cheaper guys you can mix and match with to, like maybe if you wanted to go with Barkley. Let's say you did want to go with Barkley there. And have 5,600 instead to play with. Chestnut is going to be a huge, huge situation. So keep an eye on that news with Tony Pollard's injury status. All right, Phillies. Ingram would be a good option to give us a run back for Barkley and Brown. Ingram would be a great run back there. Just make sure that you have him. Well, he's the later game, so that'd be a good spot for him. Yeah, I mean that right there would be. I think that's a good path to go. We got that stack with Vegas and Cincy. We got a Jacksonville Philly stack, and then one-offs are basically Coker and the Bears D. So we got two. You got a lot of good correlation in there. We got a 2 tight end build, and then on top of that, we got just like 1 or 2 one-offs there. So I like that direction. I'm gonna keep messing around with this. Make sure to hit the like button, get me to 30 likes so we can put out a shorter video with my favorite plays, and make sure to hit subscribe because you're gonna want to subscribe to get the alert for when those shorter videos come out. And probably come out either later on today or tomorrow. But make sure you hit subscribe and sign up for the alerts to help me out anyways, because I'm looking for 1,200 subscribers. I'm 100 short, so make sure to hit that subscribe. That helps me out, and I appreciate it, guys. I will see you a little bit later.